Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, March 1st, 2024, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright guys, well, in this video I'd like to cover this article about radiocarbon dating the old Great Lakes copper culture and what the state of archaeology and investigation is today, because clearly from the article you can see that a lot of archaeology in the US certainly, and I'd say in the Americas in general, has been ignored for all the time that archaeology and anthropology has been around. So it seems like they're just coming upon these things now. But I mean, how does that take away from our picture that we already have? It's just what the picture we have of the past is what we learned in school, which is, it seems to be like nothing. Okay, you would have to go to advanced learning to learn more about this stuff. But even at that level, what did they know? I mean, I read so many times about how just this is so under-researched. All of this stuff is just totally under-researched. So what is the state of archaeology today with the old copper culture around the Great Lakes area? It's of interest to me because where did this copper go? And they mentioned the Adena and Hopewell in this, but I'm just going to read the article to you. You can make of it what you want, but what you know already from watching some of the videos on my other channel and this channel about the Adena and the Hopewell, what they were doing, and where maybe this copper could have went to. We know all about the trails, the Michigan trails that extend all the way to the coast and everything. Apparently, during times where you had to go through friendly areas, you couldn't be going through hostile areas, so everybody was cooperating in this effort, whatever it might have been. And you have these huge artificial harbors that John Jensen found all over the place on the East Coast, and canals, etc. What were they being used for? In his estimation, some had to be a population of somewhere between 200 million and 500 million people to make use of these things adequately. So otherwise it don't make sense. When you use gigantic artificial harbors to receive what kind of ships and boats. But in any case, let me read the article to you, and it's just interesting that this fellow says something in this article that I frequently talk about on my other channel, and I've talked about before, that the cultural diffusion always seems to be coming into the Americas from outside. Whatever it is, European influence or African influence or Asian influence or whatever it is, that they look at the art and all that kind of stuff. It's not the same, but they're trying to figure out where to get the influences from for these things. If they're even, referring to the same cultures as, we know from my other channel and this, that, the Inca, Mayan, whoever, Aztec, whoever it was, stumbled upon all of these ancient ruins and then derived their culture from it. Like, possibly the Egyptians did, Japanese, whoever it was. There was obviously something else going on in this world in the ancient past that we know very little about. But maybe this helps open some different lines of thought. I don't know, but I'll read the article to you. You make of it what you want. Alright, so radiocarbon dating the old Great Lakes copper culture. Midwestern scientists are finally giving this enigmatic sign of North America's heritage the serious attention that it deserves. It's part 7 of the Mesolithic period in eastern North America. Maybe read some of these other parts, are all so interesting. By Richard L. Thornton architect and city planner. So this guy's an architect, and I guess this is what is interested. He's going to tell us a little bit about the current state of archaeology with the old copper culture. Throughout most of the first 2 centuries of this nation's existence, academicians tended to ignore the thousands of ancient copper weapons and tools that were turning up in Midwestern fields and gardens. They hoped that if they didn't talk about these artifacts, they would go away. A very similar attitude to that of Georgia archaeologists towards its many stone ruins. Then in the 1960s and 1970s, when quote-unquote pop authors began claiming that the metal artifacts were proof that Europeans or Middle Easterners founded the great civilizations of the Americas, archaeologists did take the time to find what they thought was proof that the copper was mined and the artifacts were fabricated by American Indians. The presumption was that the Great Lakes copper culture was related to the Adena and Hopewell cultures of the Ohio River Basin, since many of the implements showed stylistic sophistication, seemingly too sophisticated for primitive hunter-gatherers. Some copper artifacts are found in Adena and Hopewell burials, thus from the period during the Old Stone Age when I was attending universities until very recently, the old copper culture was dated in textbooks to have occurred from around 1000 BC to 500 AD. And here's some of those artifacts from Great Lakes region there. A new generation of scientists and archaeologists in the Midwestern United States is taking the old Great Lakes copper culture seriously. The latest technology is being utilized to determine the age of these copper artifacts. The results are astounding, but also create many other questions. It is now suspected that humans probably began to utilize almost pure deposits of Great Lakes copper around 9500 BC. But so far, accurate dating of the oldest circumstantial evidence has not been successful. However, reliable radiocarbon dating by Dr. Mike Pompiani definitely placed the earliest copper weapons and tools at around 6500 BC, which is awfully early. And of course, we notice radiocarbon, they don't like it, it's not accurate, the margin of error is too great, plus or minus. They want to be able to pinpoint the dates of these things, and they can't using this method, and they're always looking for new stuff. So just you have to take it sort of with a grain of salt what they say about this. It could be far older for all we know, and it's maybe why their dating method gets haywire after a while, because it goes much further back in time. Thus, the long-held speculation that Western Europeans created the archaic copper industry in the Great Lakes region is not possible. The earliest known use of copper tools in Europe is in the mountains of Serbia and has been dated to around 6000 BC. However, most of Europe did not enter the Copper Age until after 2000 BC. The Copper Age reached Scandinavia around 1500 BC. Okay, so some of that was spread around by the Bell Beaker people, I believe, who are kissing cousins with the Adena, okay, just as a side note. The theory that metallurgy was imported into Europe from the Near East has been practically ruled out. A second hypothesis that there were two main points of origin of metallurgy in Europe, in southern Spain and in West Bulgaria, is also doubtful due to the existence of sites outside the centers of diffusion where metallurgy was known simultaneously with or before those in the original nuclei, such as Brixleg, Tyrol, Austria. Sites closer to the supposed origins of metallurgy, such as in the north of Spain, show fewer metal artifacts than sites in the south and practically no evidence of production. So there is as much strong circumstantial evidence that indigenous Americans introduced copper weapons and tools to Western Europe. Is something I've been saying for a long time. Here's another guy who's crazy, I guess, like me, who says that You know, we're constantly being said to and, implied to by all sorts of people, whether it's mainstream or alternative from outside. It's always diffusion in, because it's the new world. It's the new world bias, as I often refer to. Okay? And it's just archaeological evidence, current archaeology in the Americas is going further and further and further back in time. They keep having to revise the Bering Strait theory again and again and again. Who and what and when and how, and they just don't know. Okay, and the native peoples here believe that they come from this land and they didn't come from Siberia or anything like that. There's native peoples here who believe that, and who's to say that they're wrong? It's just that very little archaeology has been done here in the Americas on these ancient cultures here, and that's why it just was ignored for such a long time, and just discovering stuff out now. Well, it's a little after my education. What I learned about it in the past is basically a bunch of BS. So, along with everybody else. Surprising termination of the Great Lakes copper culture. 21st century radiocarbon testing by Midwestern University seem to indicate that the manufacture of copper implements in the Great Lakes basin ceased around 1000 BC. That date precedes the Adena and Hopewell cultures in the Midwest. The Copper Age ended in Minnesota about the same time that it began in Europe. Scandinavia had no known sources of copper until Copperberg. Copper Mountain was discovered in 1288 AD near Falun, Sweden. Articles by Midwestern academics and national journalists will tell you Native Americans mostly abandoned copper implements about 3,000 years ago. After that, early Native Americans used copper mostly for smaller, less utilitarian items associated with adornment, such as beads and bracelets. That statement might be true for Minnesota, but is absolutely false for the regions occupied by the ancestors of the Chickasaw, Creek, and Uchi peoples. That problem will be discussed later in this article. The most comprehensive research into the Great Lakes copper culture is being done by Dr. David Pompiani, a geology professor at Kansas State University. As described in the March 19, 2021 issue of Science magazine, in 2010, while working on his doctoral dissertation research, Pompiani became convinced that the accepted dates for the Great Lakes copper culture were wrong. He analyzed 53 previous or new radiocarbon tests of organic matter in association with copper implements from the Great Lakes Basin. He also analyzed core samples of sedimentation that covered the mouths of the ancient copper mines. His astonishing results revealed that active mining and implement fabrication occurred 8,500 to 3,580 years before the present. That is astonishing. The starting date precedes any known copper fabrication in the Middle East or Serbia. The termination date precedes the earliest Adena culture mounds by 1,000 years. Pompiani also examined sediment cores and tree ring data from the Great Lakes region and found that a dry period some 5,000 years ago may have made devoting resources to mining even more costly. However, copper continued to be used to make awls and jewelry. That interpretation does not make sense because Native Americans in arid regions of Mexico and the southwestern United States mined deposits of almost pure copper in later years. Pompiani's article does not mention the large blocks of copper that were partially quarried at the time of the abandonment of the Great Lakes mines. They weigh 1/2 to 1 tons. They are far too large to have been carried by porters or simple Native American canoes. Their existence cannot be explained by any of the current interpretations of the old copper culture. Very interesting. Most magazine and internet articles on the Great Lakes copper culture end with quotes from Midwestern archaeologists which try to explain the new termination date. They typically say that all Native Americans decided that too much labor was involved in making copper tools and weapons. There those gringo archaeologists go again. You see, there is a big problem with this statement. Thousands of copper implements dating much later than 1580 BC have been found in southeastern archaeological sites. 16th and 17th century Spanish and French explorers observed the Chusca men in present-day Tennessee smelting copper from rock ore. The Creeks utilized copper tools, weapons, and cooking pots and body armor until the late 1600s, when iron and stone implements became available from traders in South Carolina. Okay, and he shows some implements here actually from Sweden, and just remarks about how similar these celts that were found there are to ones found in Georgia, where he's from and where he graduated from. And again, these oxhide ingots, which were reported to have been found in mounds over here. Okay, but is the ingot problem, both as a student in the fall of 1969 and as their class instructor in 1971 and 1972. The Georgia Tech School of Architecture class and pre-Columbian architecture class toured Etowah Mounds. Our guides were none other than the famous archaeologists Arthur Kelly and Louis Larson, who excavated the artifacts that one now sees in the museum. What I always remembered most about the original museum exhibits were the large number of copper artifacts. Many were removed when University of Georgia anthropology professors guided the remodeling of the museum in the mid-1990s. They also introduced the absolute lie that the two famous marble statues were hastily buried in a shallow grave at the top of Mount C as a powerful enemy Cherokees attacked and burned the town around 1585. The marble statues were found in the collapsed temple at the bottom of Mount C. Members of the Creek Confederacy occupied Etowah Mounds until the early 1700s and occupied the Etowah River Valley until 1795. The Cherokees were given northwest Georgia in secret treaty in 1784. The Creeks knew nothing about this treaty until 1790. So it's interesting what he says about there. These statues that were there before any settlers and colonists got there, because of the Creeks and whoever occupied these territories, nobody else was there. Where did these statues come from? And they always talk about these petrified remains being dug up around the Americas. Were they petrified remains or were they statues? And they just didn't think they were statues because nobody in these cultures, these native cultures, could have done anything like that, or were compelled to do anything like that, or claimed to do anything like that. And there was no evidence of it anywhere, but these things were dug up. That surprised me, since archaeology books written by southeastern archaeologists say very little about the copper tools, weapons, and body armor. There were also those strange-looking copper ingots found in the Etowah Mounds. They were X-shaped. Our textbooks, even Wikipedia today, say that the North American Indians only knew how to hammer nuggets of pure copper together to make implements. Yet the X-shaped ingots were labeled in the museum as being the form in which copper mined in Georgia and Tennessee were traded. Those ingots had to be made by pouring liquid copper into molds. Okay, so I'm not going to read on now. He talks about his exploits there in Sweden where he goes to work. And, he just talks about how, the whole history of the copper culture here was not really honestly presented in the past, and now because of new radiocarbon dating look at these things, date them into far greater past, even before the Adena and the Hopewell. But where did all this copper go? We know about the trails that go from Michigan, trails of importance here, right? So these trails go to the coastal areas where John Jensen shows us all these artificial harbors, that are huge artificial harbors there. Well, what are giant artificial harbors there for? But that could be where this copper went to. And there's been articles about people finding, they do testing of, implements there in Europe, and they trace the copper back to the Great Lakes region, they say, or whatever, and of course everybody demands proof, and again, and it's all jumbled up. It's never going to be settled. It's just they're going to believe what they want to believe until they have reason not to. But all these things have to be thought about. What kind of scale was trading going on? It was just internal, for the Dina and Hopewell or any previous civilizations that were there that were doing all this mining and creating things, that advanced in these cultures. And who's to say some of these things, like if you had these implements or whatever, and they weren't reused again and again and again, they may be attached to some piece of wood or something that you can radiocarbon date, but who's to say it wasn't even more ancient than that and then it was just reused again? You can't do it with the radiocarbon with the metal there, so it's whatever organic material is found around it or whatever, like mounted in a piece of wood or whatever it might be. So in any case, guys, I just want to read that article to you, okay, without a lot of commentary, but it just was interesting to me that the guy thinks that the diffusion of this sort of metallurgy with copper went from the Americas into Europe. Here's another guy who thinks that, besides myself. Okay, because it's always, whoever it is, the alternative mainstream influences coming from outside. Well, who's to say that? There's no proof of that, and it could very well be the opposite way around. And I've been saying that for a long time. That these cultural influences and other things stem from the Americas, where this is originally where the horse and the camel came from. You have people who are experts at agriculture and all sorts of agriculture, including fish farming and, in the Americas, especially South America there. Evidence of people, they didn't just suddenly come upon these ideas, and like, okay, let's do this right now. It was a long time in coming or whatever, so it took, many hundreds if not thousands of years to develop all these techniques and agriculture farming techniques. They were well advanced, as it's gone over in Charles C. Mann's books, Revelations in the Americas before the arrival of Columbus, 1491. So that's what archaeologists are finding down there, and anthropologists. This is the kind of things they're finding down there that they didn't know before, that they're finding out now, because now they're starting to pay attention to the Americas. And as they do, like this, they find out more things that they didn't know, that were stupid assumptions from the past. And why were all these stupid assumptions made? Well, you got people like Alice Hurdliska running things for the Department of Ethnology for the Smithsonian there, and for the United States government there. And he was a dictator, and whatever he said went, and you just had to forget about anything else, including whatever it is that you found and made your own conclusions about. You couldn't have those. You have to go along with the herd, otherwise you're going to get kicked out and excommunicated, like so many people have been in the field of science, in various fields of science, for their radical ideas, however true they might or not they might be. See, so in any case, guys, just make of it what you want. I'm just reading you what the current state of archaeology is with the old copper culture. It seems to go much, much further back. And you have to consider all these other things. Adena and Hopewell culture, while they were manufacturing things, that was their chief business, was doing this, sort of importing goods and trading them all around and coming from all around the Americas and whatnot. And what else were they doing? Was that only internally? Where did all this copper go? 500 million pounds. Whatever they found so far of copper artifacts in the U.S. could fit in like a refrigerator. It just, you could put it all in one refrigerator, that's it. Not no 500 million pounds. Where did it go? Okay, so evidently more things were going on past John Jensen's artificial harbors, huge artificial harbors, thousands of feet long and thousands of feet wide. For canoes, I doubt it. So, I don't know, guys, just add it all up and, come to your own conclusions, all right? So anyway, I just thought you might enjoy hearing about the current state of archaeology when it comes to the old copper culture of the Great Lakes area. And here's a pretty contemporary article. I think it's from 2022. So, all right, guys. Anyway, Hope you enjoyed that. Please do hit the like and subscribe. And Bugcat7 signing out. And by the way, Cryptic Cryptids just relates to this somehow. So with Bigfoot and everything. So should think about that as well. Anyway, Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.